Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Well, it's very wet here in the UK today, but I suppose that's typical for a January morning. Today, there's big celebrations because it's the anniversary of the birth of the Scottish national poet Robert Burns. Now, as you all know, Scotland is in the northern part of the UK, and the national poet of Scotland, Robert Burns, lived in the 18th century. Now, Scottish people went everywhere, not only to England, but all around the world. And when they travelled in the 19th and 20th centuries, they had two books with them, the Bible and the works of Robert Burns, his poetry. Now, it's a little bit strange because Scottish people aren't really known for reading or indeed writing poetry. Of course, some people do, but historically, it was a very poor industrial area, and people who are hard working in factories like mines and steelworks, they didn't always have time to be focusing on academic pursuits like poetry. Robert Burns, however, he was a farmer, and he did indeed write poetry. His poems became very famous after his death because they focused on injustice and inequality of the time. He was also a very romantic man, and his poems are full of emotions, particularly about his relationships, his lovers, and it seems that there were quite a few of those, as well as other things which were happening in his life. He's widely regarded as a cultural icon, and I think it's because many people could identify with his poverty. He was a poor man, he wasn't rich. After he died, they built a huge statue in his hometown, which is a place called Ayr in southwest Scotland. And it's looking a little bit dilapidated now, that statue. I think I visited it last year. But his cottage is still there, where he was born. And they've built a large museum close to where he lived. His grave also is, I think, a little bit farther south in Scotland, in a place called Dumfries. He wrote a book, well, he wrote many books of poetry, but his first one is called Poetry Mainly or Chiefly in the Scottish Dialect. Now, because his poems are written in the Scottish dialect, I can't recommend them for learning English, because even we have to read them to try to study them to understand what they mean. It's not fun. So maybe if you find a guide or some kind of plain English version of his poetry, it would be good for you to see it. But unfortunately, they're not very clear. Having said all of that, he is still widely celebrated, and tonight there will be many organized events which are called the Burns Suppers. Now, in the past, these events were largely invitation only, and they were considered to be very exclusive men's events. It doesn't happen like that anymore. Now women are permitted, and these events are ticketed, and they're usually very expensive. So I don't think normal people, like internet English teachers, are invited to go. They're also very parochial and very local things. so it's not my kind of thing. But basically, they'll eat a dish tonight which is called haggis. Haggis is basically meat from different animals all wrapped up in a sheep's stomach. Now, I have to say, it sounds disgusting, doesn't it? But it's very popular, and there's a ritual tonight which takes place. They'll read poetry to this bit of dinner because it's served with potatoes and turnips. So they'll read to the haggis, then they'll stab it, and then they'll cut it up. So they'll read Burns' poetry, and then they put a knife in it, cut it, and eat it. It's really disgusting. I mean, uh, this dish is basically boiled meat wrapped up in sheep's stomach. It's not very nice, and of course there'll be a lot of whiskey, which is another reason to avoid these kinds of events. They're largely social events, and they're organized by band clubs and societies around the world. Near where Barnes was born, they have his cottage, and now they have a museum dedicated to him as well. Of course, these things are largely funded by tourism, and particularly American tourism, because Scottish people went to America in the 20th century and before, and of course, they took with them the traditions of reading Burns' poetry. So the Burns societies in the United States, they often generate lots of tourism by wanting to visit the area associated with Burns. It's very hard to get to. I mean, when you go to Ayr Town Centre, which is incredibly dilapidated now, it's not a pleasant sight. Remember, southwest Scotland is one of the poorest areas in the UK. Once you get there, you have another little trip, which is about 20 minutes, half an hour, that takes you up to the museum. And there's no clear, direct transport links. You can catch a public bus, but it's not easy. It's very parochial. Anyway, once you get there, it's very nice to go and see. There's lots of things up there if the weather permits, and they have this beautiful statue which they've placed on the grounds. It's very nice. It's again not in the best shape now, but I think it's looked after by the local museum. So that's today Robert Burns and his poetry. Robert Burns, born in 1759 in a town called Ayr. Wherever you are in the world today, have a look around because you might well find a Burns Society. They're everywhere and they hold regular events. To be honest with you, Burns poetry really isn't the kind of thing you can learn English with because it's written in a very Scottish, hard, guttural way. It's not English that we use anymore. However, another thing that you can look out for around the world is Toastmasters. That's a group of people who love giving speeches in English and in very nice English. So if Robert Burns and his poetry doesn't float your boat, doesn't make you excited, then you can easily try to find Toastmasters. They welcome everyone, and it's a great way to listen to speeches or to be encouraged to make speeches if you really wanted to do that. They're wonderful things, and they exist at least all across Europe, as far as I can see. And it is known amongst English speakers and English learners that they are great places to go to hear English speeches. So there we are. Not associated with Robert Burns, but depending on your interest, if you don't like poetry, then Robert Burns might not be for you, but Toastmasters might be. So tonight, people will be eating this haggis. I must admit, people here generally don't go to these Burns events because they're too expensive now. I won't be there, but I'll be maybe buying some haggis, which you can buy all over the UK. You can buy it in cans. So I'll probably buy the vegetarian version and put it on a pizza, or buy a frozen haggis pizza from the local supermarket and have that. Because it would be nice just to do something different, and it's always a good excuse to eat pizza. Um, yeah, there'll be a lot of alcohol, I think, at these events as well. Some of them will be taking place at the weekend instead of today. I think it can cost in excess of £50 a ticket to go to a Burns supper. And as we're not very social anymore, I don't really think it's very popular. I think it's becoming very elite, maybe for certain types of people, for expats around the world. Americans love that kind of thing. They call Robert Burns Robbie Burns. We call him Rabbi Burns, but in America he's known as Robbie, which some people get quite offended at. But oh yeah, he's loved around Scotland. But it's important to say only southwest Scotland. I think in the north there are other Gaelic poets like Sorley MacLean, who didn't write in English, and they're widely celebrated in the north. So, Southwest Scotland, in general around the UK, whatever the Scottish people, there will be a band's event, which is why I think you should have a look to see what's happening near you. You might be surprised to find that there's something going on organized by one of the band's societies around the world. That's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let's talk again soon. See you. Bye.